Friends, welcome to somewhere in the middle of the Nevada desert. Now, if you remember correctly, last week we got together and we did a round-the-block review of the 2017 Hyundai Elantra Eco. Now, I would love to tell you that that was all about the Hyundai Elantra Eco, but really, that is not the truth. It was more about this, the 2017 Hyundai Elantra Sport. And let's just say you need to get your notebooks out, your iPads, your Etch-a-Sketch, because we have a lot to cover. So let's start where we always start, the engine, but maybe in this whole process, we may find Mo Green. Now, right from the top, there are three major items or changes that differentiate a Hyundai Elantra Sport from a serial Hyundai Elantra. And one of them is the engine. We'll get to the other two a bit later in this episode. So this is a 1.6 liter, four-cylinder, direct injected gasoline turbocharged engine. Now that is different than the one we drove last week. That's the 1.4, also turbocharged, also direct injected. But there are significant differences in the output, and that's why we like this car. 201 horsepower, which comes at a relatively high engine speed of 6,000 RPM, and more important to us, 195 pound-feet of torque, and that comes in at a stupidly low 1,500 RPM, stays flat all the way to 4,500 RPM. Now, let's put that aside, let's talk transmissions. Now, yes, there is an automatic on offer. It's a 7-speed dual clutch, and you want to think it's the same as the one we drove last week. Actually, it is a different unit, but it's also manufactured by Hyundai. And just as an aside here, so Hyundai is like a large multinational conglomerate that has all sorts of different bits and tentacles that reach around the world. One of them is a transmission subsidiary that manufactures, or really designs, engineers, and manufactures the transmissions in-house. Now, the one we're going to drive is a 6-speed manual that's fitted to this blue car here. Then, have I told you that Hyundai, they've hired different designers over the years from manufacturers like Audi, Peter Schreier. Well, they decided, you know what, now the cars look good, why don't we hire somebody to make them go better? And so they hired a guy by the name of Albert Biermann from BMW's M division. And so he's starting to really put his fingerprint on these cars. And one of the changes here, and this is unusual, so there's a different build in this car in the Korean domestic market as opposed to the US market. So for example, this the airbox here, it has more baffles in the Korean domestic market, where here it's a bit less, and the idea is to change the sound. I mean, think of it as like baby steps moving forward. We'll have to test that on the full first drive review. Now, let's put this aside and let's step on to some of the other tranches that make this the Hyundai Elantra Sport. Now let's unpack all of the changes that relate to driving dynamics, and I would argue this is equal to the importance, or even almost more important than the changes in the engine. So the first thing you notice is the wheels. Yes, they look different, and to me, I think they're rather cool, but they are larger. So if we look at any other serial production Hyundai Elantra, they are either 16s in like an SE or 17s in a Limited. These are 18. Now let's press on to the front, and behind that wheel, you look at the rotor. In, again, a serial production Hyundai Elantra, that's an 11-inch rotor. This is a 12-inch rotor. Sadly, no change in the back. But while we are back here, there is a large change behind the wheel and the rotor, and that is the rear suspension. So again, if we were to look at a serial production standard SE Eco or Limited, it's like a modified twist beam suspension back there. And we've talked about Hyundai, not just Elantras, but all Hyundais, all Kias, in terms of their driving dynamics on like a spectrum, and said that like if a Mazda 3 is up here, the Hyundais generally have been down here and starting to go up this way. And this has been a huge reason why, because the suspension hasn't really supported the other changes, especially when you read the design of the car. Now, it is a fully independent rear suspension. So this is one of these changes that's coming from our fellow friend from BMW, Herr Biermann. So vielen Dank, Herr Biermann. And really, I want to step back here and just point something out. This is not a totally new car. This is a modified version of a car that's been out for a year now, to change out a rear suspension, that is a lot of money. And I kind of take my hat off to the people that actually made that decision, because in this segment, super hyper competitive and cost is everything. And that probably adds, I would argue, probably about $1,000 in the actual cost of the car. Now, let's press on to some other changes here. Yeah, there are like tuning changes to the suspension. It's like 14% stiffer here. The steering rates change. But let's put that aside and we'll talk about that in the full first drive review. But now, there is this third tranche of changes, and I want to call them a lot of small changes that add up to one big change. And just look at the difference. You look at the car and say, yeah, that's a Hyundai Elantra, but it looks different for some reason. Well, let me show you why. Notice the rocker extension is different on this car. Obviously the wheels, tires are also changed. There is a totally rear, like an updated rear fascia back here. And what they've done is they've put a diffuser here. The deck lid is completely different. And the idea is to have like a more of an aerodynamic deck lid. I mean, granted, on a front wheel drive car, you could argue kind of a waste, but it does look so much cooler. The tail lights are LED and have a different design. And then follow me over to the front here, and this is where you see a lot of changes in one small place. The light, this whole signature, and we talked about, was it with Dave Leone? Remember when the Escalade came back? That's almost like, it seems like 15 years ago, but that was only like 3 years ago, where he talked about light signatures, front and rear, and they really stepped it up with the Escalade. Here, same kind of thing. There is a DRL here, and they've changed this whole array of the lighting here, but notice there's this cool little like red stripe in here. Now, if I'm kind of reading the tea leaves correctly here, there was talk, the guy who runs product for Hyundai in the US, his name is Mike, great guy. He was talking about Hyundai and a forthcoming N, as in Nancy, N range of cars. I wouldn't be shocked if you see this in a forthcoming N range of cars, but you didn't hear that from me. Anyway, the grille changes a little bit. You can see some details here. There are some other changes, but we need to press on to the inside. So the menagerie of changes continues on the interior here. The first thing you notice is a D-shaped steering wheel. It's not just the shape down here, it's also the indentations up here. We'll have to spend some time talking about that in the full first drive review. Then the other thing you notice is the gauge package actually changes. So there's red needles, but also the orientation of the gauges changes as well. And then, did I mention it has manual transmission? But while we're looking at that, we can ogle a red stitch here in the boot, but that red stitch is repeated in the seat as well as on the armrest here. And then the seats themselves, basically any color you want as long as it's black. And then, of course, you've got like the Sport logo here as well. Not a huge fan of the carbon, or really the faux carbon fiber here. This is not a fancy car, so how about we not go with try to have like super expensive materials. I think this would have been great with just like an aluminum trim or just a silver piece of trim like this to kind of lighten up the interior. But one change that they did make, which I'm shocked about, and actually does make a huge difference, the headliner. So this one is a black headliner. Now normally you would think a black headliner would make the car feel more claustrophobic, but that's really not the case here, especially when you've got the sunroof you can open and close. But more importantly, it makes it feel more upmarket, and this is a C-segment car. And then in previous Hyundai episodes, not just Elantra, you and I have spent a lot of time talking about connectivity with Hyundais, and they have been kind of at the leading edge of this. They were the first ones to do Android Auto, and we were the first ones to drive that car. And then they were one of the first to do Apple CarPlay. So this is really no different. It's fitted as standard with Apple CarPlay. But wait, there's more. There is Android Auto. And that's literally the most basic model, has both. I believe that is about everything on the inside. I think now we need to go back out to the Nevada desert. So in summary, what do we got? Well, friends, full disclosure, I don't think we've ever been in this position before, but I am about as excited to drive this as if this car were coming from Hethel. So with that, I want to turn this around to you guys and leave you guys with a question. And the question is not, would you choose this over the obvious competitors? Because I haven't given you enough information to make that choice. So we'll do that in the full first drive review, so make sure you come back for that. But no, my question is, if this is really going after a Civic Si, the Volkswagen GTI, and we just did that Autobahn round the block review, would you tune this car? And if you did, what specifically would you do to this car in terms of tuning? And I don't mean just yes or no, I mean like you would tune the engine, suspension, how would you do it? And for good measure, throw in what you currently drive and what region of the world you hail from. Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV, all one word, MotoManTV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I want to leave you with two things. Number one, make sure you download our fancy new mobile application, which you can download for free at Apple iTunes or Google Play. And by the way, did you know that we are live on 5, count them, 5 international airlines? And number two, I want to leave you with a fun fact. The full first drive review may or may not have a guest host. Do you want to go see if we can try to find some of those red-headed Yolandas?
Yeah!
Let's do it!